So without further ado, let's bring our first speaker, Arun Sundararajan. I hope I pronounced that right. He's an economist and professor at NYU Stern. He heads the Social Cities Initiative and their Center for Urban Science and Progress. And he also serves on the advisory board of Peers. So thank you, Arun. If you've been reading about the sharing economy or been to conferences, you've likely heard and read Arun's ideas. He's been published widely, including New York Times, Wired, and Harvard Business Review. So we're lucky to have him today.
Okay, thank you, Shelby. All right, so I'm really glad to see all of you here. It's always great to sort of be in the last session of a conference because you know you're talking to the true believers. So give yourselves a hand. So the idea I'm going to talk about today is that I believe that creating institutions that reduce inequality is how we can catalyze the sharing economy. This idea looks better against a backdrop of aluminum siding. And so there you go. And so this is a topic that has come up a lot during this conference, so I'm not going to sort of give you an elaborate background. But, this is the sharing economy. However, money exchanges hands to facilitate this kind of sharing. So when you combine sharing with the exchange of money, is that going to increase inequality or is it going to reduce inequality? Well, to me, I'm an economist, I'm an academic, so it's good to sort of try and sort of get to the roots of what are the things that reduce inequality? Well, one form of inequality is inequality in wealth. A driver of inequality in wealth is sort of access. And so, if we want to reduce, in general, wealth inequality, we need to create institutions or platforms that allow people who are not part of that 1% to have access to entrepreneurship opportunities, sort of create gateways for innovation for them. We need to be able to give people who don't, education shouldn't be elite. Education needs to sort of be democratized. Access to financial capital so that you can go from being a wage earner to being an owner has to sort of be democratized as well. And so you want to equalize access to financial capital. And for those of you who are familiar with Pickery, if you're not, don't worry about it, means that we have to sort of give more people ways of getting access to the investment opportunities that the wealthy normally have access to. And so that shifts more people towards the R. And we also want to raise the rate of economic growth in general because a higher rate of economic growth means less inequality. Now, measured by these metrics, this is today's sharing economy. So on this front, we're doing a pretty good job. I mean, I see Airbnb and Etsy and platforms like that, Getaround, RelayRides, Sidecar, Lyft, as gateways to entrepreneurship and innovation. We've got a wide variety of education platforms. We've got once crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding is sort of mainstream, that will equalize access to financial capital and give people sort of on the lower end of the income spectrum the ability to have the same kinds of make the same kinds of investments that are normally reserved for the wealthy. Okay, I think that the issue of equal ownership of the institutions themselves, should a platform be a cooperative? Should a platform be a privately owned company? It's an important topic. It's been discussed before, but it's also a red herring. What we need to be focusing on is the equality or inequality of the total value created by the entire platform, not just sort of who owns the platform. And so, I think a few years down the line, we're going to invent interesting new models of ownership. But for now, I'd like to say a word in favor of the shareholder model at this point in the evolution, because there is a tough regulatory battle that is being fought. We are creating a new regulatory infrastructure for this kind of peer-to-peer sharing in a wide variety of industries, and I think that is going more smoothly than it otherwise would have if it wasn't led by venture-backed, privately owned, sort of well-financed companies. This is my favorite part. I feel that we have to go beyond measuring inequality in terms of income and wealth To me, the biggest promise of the sharing economy when I first heard about it was that I said, well, access without ownership means that you can get access to experiences that sort of transcend how much money you have. Because if you have to own, that sort of limits what you can experience. But if you can get access without ownership, that expands the possibilities for the people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. Now, a barrier to this are good institutions that facilitate peer-to-peer exchange or peer-to-peer sharing across socioeconomic boundaries. The people up there, Jennifer Bradley from Brookings, My Turn Neighbor Goods, partners in trying to create a template for doing exactly this. An MBA team that's working with me on this. And we're trying to create templates that will allow people who have a lot to be able to easily share the stuff that they have through peer-to-peer platforms with people who don't have that much. Sharing, transcending socioeconomic boundaries. It seems like we need not just digital, but real-world institutions to sort of kick in the short run. There are lots of different barriers. There are lots of challenges, which I'm not going to get into the details of. I'm doing a lot of research about this. There is a collaborative that will launch at the end of the month that you'll hear more about. Stay tuned. And so, from your point of view, facilitating the creation of an entity that reduces inequality is how you can catalyze the sharing economy. Thank you for your time.
Up next is Jose Quinonez. He is the founding CEO of the Mission Asset Fund, an award-winning nonprofit that is on a mission to create fair financial marketplace for hardworking families.
It's great to be here. I just learned I was part of the share economy today, so thanks for that welcome. That's awesome. Sorry, thank you. Giving credit where credit is due. That is how we can stimulate the sharing economy. I'm going to explain a little bit more about what I mean by giving credit where credit is due in a little bit. I first want to introduce and to kind of tell you a little bit about Mission Asset Fund and the problem that we're actually working to solve. And then I'll come back to this idea of giving credit where credit is due. We are a nonprofit organization. We're actually based here in San Francisco, right on Valencia Street. We got started doing our work about 7 years ago with the whole mission of helping low-income, primarily immigrant communities transition into the financial mainstream, trying to help them, kind of build their financial assets, build their financial capability, so that they can become active and visible and successful, actors in our economy. The issue for us was like, well, how are you going to do that? When folks are primarily, unbanked, people don't have credit, they don't have credit history, and that's something that we started, seeing in the Mission District, but soon realized that it wasn't just a problem of immigrants in the Mission District, but it was also a national problem. A problem to the point where we actually have about 54 million people, in America today that are considered, credit invisible. These are people that have no access to credit scores, or they have such a thin credit file that they can't even generate a credit number for them. Those are the folks that we call credit invisible. We also have about 17 million individuals that are considered unbanked, people that don't have bank accounts or checking accounts. Things that you and I here sort of take for granted. We're talking about 17 million adults that don't even have the basic tools. And also the folks that are really stuck in their situation where the wages are flat, cost of living is going up, and because they don't have access to low-cost loans that you and I take for granted, folks are actually turn to payday lenders or check cashers, that actually charge an extremely high interest rates. I mean, to the point that there was a report recently released that noted that about folks that make about $25,000 a year, they're actually paying about 9.5 or almost close to 10% of their income on financial services. I mean, imagine, if you're low income, you're making $25,000, you don't have a checking account or savings account, you don't have access to low-cost credit, and about 10% of your income goes to pay for the high-cost, payday loans or check cashers. Those are the problems that we're trying to solve. Now, the issue is like how. How are we solving them? And that is really the point of our innovation. We noticed that within the, particularly immigrant communities, we have a, time-honored practice of actually coming together and pooling each other's resources and actually helping each other out. This is an activity that is known throughout the world. The academics call it Roscas, which is rotating savings and credit associations. Is not, oh my goodness, 2 minutes. Well, so lending circles is, it's a long story, but you know what, I'm gonna slow down so I can tell you the high points. What we're doing is formalizing what people are already doing with their money, which they're coming together and lending each other money, but they're doing it very informally, so nobody knows about it, and nobody's recording that. So what we're doing is essentially are servicing those loans through getting them to sign promissory notes and program agreements, so that way we can record that and report that to the credit bureaus. That's really our source of innovation, is really recognizing and give them credit for what they're already doing. The impact of our work is that, we see our clients, increasing the credit scores by an average of 168 points. About 30% of our clients come into our organization without any credit score. In 10 months, they have a credit score. They're paying, they're paying down their high-cost debt, so they're getting their big monkey off their back and making it smaller, so that they can actually, kind of get to a more stable financial situation. And 100% of our clients are getting banked and scored. So we've been doing this over the past 5 years, and we've already managed, close to $3 million in social loans. These are, again, money that people are lending themselves. We're managing that. Our repayment rate is, 99.02%. Our default is close to 0%. And so, of course, the national impact is great, but the issue is that as we expand and provide our program to other organizations, the issue that we're grappling now is about regulatory infrastructures. And that's something that in Sacramento, we have a bill, SB 896, that we're trying to push through, through Sacramento, so that we can have the state, the government recognize our work and recognize the partnerships that we're building. Because right now, in order to expand, we definitely need the regulatory assurance, in order to do more of our work. And that's, I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to do that. But I will leave you with that image of a nice, beautiful beach in terms of.
Thanks, Jose. Up next is Denise Cheng. Denise Cheng lives at the... Got some fans out here. She lives at the intersection of civics, media, and work. She specializes in designing frameworks for meaningful participation, often in media creation and workforce development. Denise received her master's in comparative media studies from MIT, where she was funded by the Knight Foundation as a part of the Media Lab's Center for Civic Media. In past lives, she was a Toe Knight Entrepreneur Journalism Fellow with CUNY J School, the Citizen Journalism Coordinator for the Rapidian, community builder, more fans, a community builder among hyperlocal journalism outlets, strategist for involving marginalized groups in the community, media, and Peace Corps volunteer.
Hi, everyone. I'm Denise. For the last couple of years, I've been at MIT looking at peer-to-peer marketplaces. And when I got this prompt, blank will catalyze the sharing economy, a lot of different ideas came to mind, but since I only have 5 minutes, what I really wanted to say is that straight talk will catalyze the sharing economy. So we've kind of gone over the whole gamut of sharing during the last 2 days. And very broadly speaking, when we say sharing, we mean things like credit unions and co-ops and co-housing. We mean things like smart cities and smart transportation, where it's just as easy to jump on a city bike or take a Lyft as it is to jump on Muni or walk to wherever it is that you're going. We mean things like time banking, and we also mean things like tool libraries where people pull together their underutilized equipment for community benefit. So when we say sharing economy, we actually mean a lot of very different things. We're talking about peer-to-peer marketplaces, crowd lending, we're talking about things like Wikipedia and Linux, we're talking about DIY and maker movements. So you can really see that the sharing economy is more or less an umbrella term. but this actually has some implications. So I look specifically at peer-to-peer marketplaces that are online that enable people to monetize skills and assets that they already have. Those are things like Airbnb and Etsy and Skillshare and kitchen surfing. And these are usually actually in the national scene often referred to as the sharing economy. And this has two practical implications, one in policy and the other in how providers and how companies understand their commitments to each other. So the two excerpts up on the screen right now come from the same resolution. It's called the Shareable Cities Resolution. Last year, 9 mayors from across the country pledged their support for this resolution. And when you look at it, actually, it has a couple of different definitions for what the sharing economy is. On the one hand, it talks about it as marketplaces, which are technically private business models. And then on the other hand, it talks about models that are based on the commons. It talks about bicycle sharing, co-working, cooperatives, and these are all these are very different models. So what we see here is that when policymakers, when regulators, when people who are really influential are talking about the sharing economy, they actually each mean a different thrust of the sharing economy. And what I really like is earlier during this conference, Alexandra Samuel said that we really only have a very brief window to get things right. So when we use sharing economy in the way that we have been using it, what you see is that either people will continue to talk past each other, or there will be such a broad set of regulations passed that really it'll just end up hurting everybody. On the other side of this, we have relationships between providers and the companies. So providers and companies are really in a sort of business partnership. Together, they're building up a brand, they're building up quality, reliability, and experience for people. And because of this, they actually have a sense of solidarity, right? Not just among other providers, but also with the company. So one of the people that I interviewed, actually not just one, but several people that I interviewed, when they were referring to the CEOs of these companies, they actually referred to them as our CEO. But the thing is that these people are independents, which basically means that they have no buffer. Typically speaking, when you're an employee, your company is your buffer, but when you're an independent, you're out there weathering it on your own. So they pay for their self-employment tax, they pay for their income tax, they pay for permitting, and they can't draw from unemployment, actually. And then there are also issues of liability. You have, when somebody has to answer on a legal level, it's actually the providers who are on the front lines. Recently in Pittsburgh and Wisconsin, we've seen that police officers have been actually hailing Uber and Lyft, and when their drivers come to pick them up, they will slap them with a $300 fine. So there's a problem in this, in that by using the term sharing economy, people get kind of confused as to what the commitments are, and companies that embrace the term sharing economy are not necessarily actually committing to the suggested values of the sharing economy. So what I want to say is that we should actually be a little bit more considerate when we use different terms. When we're talking about peer-to-peer marketplaces, maybe we should actually be saying things like peer economy. And because the thing is, when we're talking about sharing economy, it really relies on an interpretive understanding of the word to share. You have all of these different examples, but then you also have shareholders. I mean, the word share is in that title alone, right? And then you have examples like U-Haul, you have examples like Avis and Hertz, and those are the same model as Bixby and Zipcar. And I've even heard somebody say that loans is a way of banks and people actually collaborating together to share risk, right? So there's all of these different ways of looking at the sharing economy. So when it comes to what you can do to catalyze the sharing economy, I would say keep it real. This is going to be really important because once we can get past the language confusion, we can actually really get down to work in that brief window of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Denise. Up next, we have Jessica Scorpio. Jessica is the founder and director of marketing at Getaround.
Thanks, Shelby. Hi, everyone. My name's Jessica Scorpio. I'm one of the founders of Getaround. It's really great to be here today. I'm going to talk to you about how sharing, one of our most iconic resources, is catalyzing the sharing economy. What I'm talking about, the automobile. Sharing cars is actually completely transforming the fundamentals of our transportation system. Before I go and jump into this big idea, it's probably one you've all heard before, but I want to really dig into car sharing and ride sharing. I want you guys to think about your favorite car sharing and ride sharing service, whether it's Uber, RelayRides, Getaround, Zipcar, Sidecar, Lyft, so many great companies building great products. How many of you here, and feel free to raise your hand at home, have used car sharing or ride sharing before? Please put your hands up. Okay, this is amazing. This is what I expected. You like car sharing and ride sharing. So that's actually pretty phenomenal. And the stats around cars are pretty huge, and that's what makes this space a really big idea. So if you think about cars, there's 1 billion cars on the planet that sit idle 23 hours a day. And cars are actually 19% of people's budget for living. Transportation, it generally makes up around 20% of people's wallet. Cars are also about the second biggest household expense, which is why lots of people are really looking for other alternatives to car ownership. If you're choosing to own a car, it's really expensive, and so you want to see how you can offset that expense. And if you're not using it, there's so many great options to take advantage for now. So if you think of car sharing or ride sharing, they're taking advantage of basically these trends. And car sharing, the reason we're talking about it today, as to why it's catalyzing the sharing economy, has actually been called the gateway drug to the sharing economy. Press obviously likes this, and researchers have called it that. And it actually goes to about 10 years of usage of car sharing just in the US alone that makes this idea come to life. So basically what it means is that if you try a car sharing service, you're quite a bit more likely to use other sharing economy services. And the reason this is the case is that it's sticky and you need it. People use it and then their mindset around ownership actually changes. So they're much more likely to want to use other sharing economy services. I'll get into the product experience and why that's the case in a minute, but I just wanted to leave you with kind of an idea in the US. There's actually 6 billion car hours available every day to share. So if you add on the ride, that's just with car sharing. If you take those and you can use them for car sharing and ride sharing, there's just a huge opportunity to bring people together around cars. 2 minutes. Time is ticking. Great. So wanted to talk a little bit about the experience around car sharing and ride sharing, what makes it so powerful. I think it's really important that sharing economy services can be easy to use, on demand. It shouldn't be harder to use the sharing economy or more expensive to use the sharing economy. We can leverage our strengths to actually have a better service. So all the apps we just talked about, it's like this. You could surprise and delight your customers, and I think that's what gets you really good word of mouth and really good usage. So one thing you see with the car sharing, ride sharing space is that it has to be one of the most used sharing economy services on a daily basis. That makes it habit forming and that makes it addictive. Because it's so useful to people, you can actually use it almost on a daily basis, which means it's reinforcing this idea that you enjoy the sharing economy and that you need it. Around the idea of mobility, there's actually a huge opportunity through car sharing to work with legislators, to work with cities. Car sharing, including Getaround, we've seen tremendous benefits from this. Because sharing cars takes up to 32 cars off the road, it means that cities and government want to work with us, and they're actually providing benefits for sharing cars rather than trying to regulate and restrict that use. So that's a huge benefit to using the sharing cars for catalyzing the sharing economy. A lot of people ask, what can you do to catalyze the sharing economy? Sounds like everyone here is using Getaround and all the other car sharing services or ride sharing services out there, so keep using them. The one thing you probably learned from this talk is that people who try car sharing try other sharing economy services. So if you're wanting to promote sharing economy, share your car, and because it's so easy and such a magical experience with car sharing or ride sharing, convince that skeptic to try one of these services, and they'll probably become a fanatic. So sharing cars is how we can catalyze the sharing economy. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jessica. So next up, we've got Neal Gorenflo, who is the co-founder of Shareable. Hopefully it's a familiar name to lots of people in the audience. Yeah, let's hear it. So Shareable is a nonprofit whose mission is to empower everyone to share for a joyous, resilient, and equitable world.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So what I wanted to talk about is, that's the wrong slide. But what I wanted to talk about is how the grassroots will catalyze the sharing economy. And I want to tell, yes! So I'll tell a little story to get us into that. So around 2006 in San Francisco, I was hosting this salon about sharing and collaboration called the Abundance League. And I needed a space to host my events. It was really hard to find space, actually. But there was this little place called Citizen Space. And it was this new thing called co-working. So I would host it there, and it was really great. They gave us a break because we were, this grassroots project, nonprofit. And I really took note of this. I thought it was a really cool thing. And at the time, there was only a few of these around the world, co-working spaces. They were one of the first. And the founders of this, Brad Newberg, Chris Messina, Tara Hunt, they really did an amazing job of kind of defining, they weren't the first necessarily, but they did a really good job of defining what co-working meant. Chris Messina was really good on social media. He's the guy who invented the hashtag or something like that, and they defined it and they spread the word about it around globally. And so this is 2006. 8 years later, there's over 3,000 co-working spaces around the world, and most of these are independent. There's a few kind of chain, but these are people who are listening to this conversation about co-working and deciding, I want that in my life and in my community. And this, the interesting thing about this is that co-working is just one of a pretty large collection of local grassroots sharing innovations that we see and write about at Shareable. So I just have a short list. If you know what any of these are, I want you to shout out. Hacker spaces. Okay. Tool libraries. Bike kitchens. Repair cafes. Okay. Time banks. Farmers markets. All right. Cooperatives. Come on. And skill shares. And then there's some that are kind of new, like Sunday soups, and they're also free stores. So not only are these, the cool thing is that these are spreading just like co-working did. Some of them. Hacker spaces are like 1,000, and I mean it's gone from a few hundred or a handful to over 1,000 in just like 4 or 5 years. Tool libraries are on the rise. People are doing repair cafes. You can do them anywhere. They're just popping up all over the place. And what this represents is another and equally valid path to impact that's based on replication rather than scale. All right, and this is the space that we at Shareable we're entering into to kind of fan that flame, to put more energy behind where there's already a lot of energy. And so what we did in the fall is we launched the Sharing Cities Network, and we're connecting those local sharing entrepreneurs to share knowledge and help each other. And our spring campaign is called #SharingSpring, and it's really taken off. We've asked our community to host ShareFests, and 35 groups from around the world are gathering people in their communities in the next couple of months And these, ShareFest is a public sort of showcase of everything that could be shared locally. And these events go from like a one-day event to, there's a handful that are 3-day events. And how many people are from Oakland? Here. Oakland is knocking it out of the park, doing 29 separate events. So there's a huge, huge amount of energy. So my call to action, how you can catalyze the sharing economy is, if this kind of thing speaks to you, start one, join our network, and get engaged, get connected to the Sharing Cities network. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Neal. So last up, we've got Sunil Paul, who is the co-founder and CEO of peer-to-peer transportation pioneer Sidecar.
Great, thank you. Oops. All right, we'll just start there. Hi, everybody. So I want to talk about an idea that I think will, a simple idea, that can catalyze this entire community, this entire movement, and really take us to the next level as the sharing economy. First, I want to introduce you to 3 people. This is David on the left. David used to be a banker, and after 25 years, he lost his job and had a hard time getting another job because he's over 50. He now makes his living giving rides on Sidecar. The person in the middle is Keith. Keith works at Zynga in South of Market, and he lives in the marina. He gives rides to and from work, and he makes a little money on those rides. And it's enough to pay for parking and depreciation, gasoline, and he has a little extra money left over for a couple of lattes every day. And the woman on the right is Diane. And Diane is a mother of 2. She gives rides after she drops her kids off in the morning. And maybe again, she'll give rides after she's helped her kids with homework. She makes about $3,000 a year. And her car, however, costs her a little bit more than that. So which of these 3 people are engaged in a commercial activity? All 3 of these folks are examples of the sharing economy. And those are examples out of Sidecar, but we have all kinds of examples you've heard about. We are allowing strangers to stay in our homes. We're allowing them to walk our dogs and to cook great meals for us. It's changed the definition of a stranger, and we're just getting going. But what it's also done is blurred the line between what is personal and what is commercial. And this blurring is not new. There have been times in the past where we've had this same kind of blurring of lines, where it wasn't clear what side is one, what side is the other. What we need in order to catalyze this entire sharing economy is to make it clear again what is personal and what is commercial. We need a safe harbor for sharing. What is that? It basically is the idea that when you're engaged in sharing something that is your personal property or your personal skills, that you should be able to make a little bit of money off that. As long as you don't make a profit, it's not a commercial activity. This is not the first time we've had to deal with this problem. If we go back and look at the 1980s, late 1970s, we decided as a country we need to encourage carpooling, and it wasn't clear. Is that a commercial activity if you accept compensation from your passenger for a toll? Do you need commercial insurance for that? It took federal action to make it clear to all the states this is not a commercial activity. It's a safe harbor for sharing. In the 1990s, eBay and PayPal came along. You could sell cards from your attic. You could make transfers from one person to another. Was that a personal activity or was that a commercial activity? Again, we had legislation that made it clear that if you make up to a certain number of transfers on PayPal, you don't need a commercial activity. You don't need to file a 1099. It's a safe harbor for sharing. And this core idea that there are certain activities that should be protected from the commercial reach of government is core to the idea of a safe harbor for sharing. We need it because it protects the innovation that's possible in this kind of the peer-to-peer environment. And we need it because what we've seen already in regulation and activities across the United States, and certainly in ride sharing, is that once you're declared commercial, entrenched interests now have a new way to beat you back. We need a safe harbor for sharing to protect these activities from being considered commercial, because the personal activity gets lost in that definition of commercial and is vulnerable to all those actions. And finally, a safe harbor for sharing is a personal rights issue and a property rights issue. We have a certain right over what we can do with our property. So what does this mean in terms of action? It means that for your particular segment, think through what does it mean to have a safe harbor for sharing. In ride sharing, we've put forward the idea that you should be able to make up to the average cost of owning a car in the United States. That's $10,000 a year. And below that level is a personal use, and above that level, we get it. There should be, it's appropriate for additional regulation in the sector. But every sector is going to be a little different. The second thing that we need to do is really talk about this idea and spread this big idea of a safe harbor for sharing, because it applies across all of us. And a victory and the discussion about it in one sector helps all of us in the other sectors of the sharing economy. I think we all started into the sharing economy because we believe that there are opportunities with the sharing economy to improve our communities, improve the environment, and really genuinely make the world a better place. And a safe harbor for sharing is an important tool, important idea that can help take us to the next level, make that world a possibility. Thanks.
Excuse me. Well, thanks, everybody. A lot of really interesting ideas. And one of the things that I find most intriguing is the diversity of ideas that we have out there. We're sort of really moving beyond, what's sort of the next, Airbnb of X, and really talking about ways that we can, help an economy mature, which I find to be incredibly exciting. With those diverse ideas, there's also diverse perspectives. So it'd be great to have a little dialogue and hear some reactions to those ideas. So I do have some specific questions, but before I kick off, are there any sort of general reactions that people want to kick off?
I'm closest to the mic, so let me start. I chose my seat strategically. So I have reactions to all of you. I'm going to have to choose. I think what you're doing is awesome. I will react to Denise by making sure that I keep my
clients themselves. So I think we have to really, rethink what we're saying, and because I think we can actually gain a lot more allies if we actually ensure that, that all those victories that we won through the 70s against redlining and so forth, that they're not going to just go away just because now we're in a new economy. I mean, those things cannot go away. I mean, I would battle for those things, right? So that was our talking point, and then we ensured that was going to happen, and I think our bill, is enjoying a lot of support, because we're ensuring that we're not going back on those protections, and so I think we need to have a deeper conversation about what that means from different perspectives. So
Can I? So I just a quick comment on this. I think. These protections are absolutely important. They're hard fought and kind of fundamental to our society now. So going back on it would be, I don't think anyone's advocating that. I think what we're talking about with a safe harbor is a different idea, which is that there is commercial activity, and commercial activity does deserve a kind of level of care by government. It makes sense, whether it's helping the transition out of the taxi industry or it's preventing redlining or whatever these, whatever the appropriate role is. There is also a right and a need to encourage innovation that a safe harbor protects and encourages. And in the same way that you don't want to have to go through the hassle, if I pay you for dinner or we split an Airbnb, I shouldn't have to issue a 1099 to you at the end of the quarter. In the same way that if I sell some baseball cards that I found in my attic on Airbnb, I shouldn't need a business license. That there are these low-grade activities that right now are being considered commercial activity. And there are jurisdictions for us that are saying, you know what, if you want to be the guy giving a ride on your way to work, you need a drug test. Pee in a cup before you can give a ride to someone at work. Like, that's just unacceptable. And so this is the point of the safe harbor, is let's create this boundary for personal action.
Yeah, and I agree completely conceptually. I just think that in addition to the sort of like the different industries sort of like, thinking carefully about whether they want it to be sort of covering costs or more, just to sort of that they should keep an eye on sort of like, the long term, where they don't somehow preclude sort of more substantive commercial activity through their platforms that might be desirable in a few years, by sort of restricting the kinds of people who can, like, I mean, this is, there's nothing that prevents a safe harbor and sort of commercial activity, and both of them sort of connecting through the platform. But I worry that these things will be mixed up, and you will end up with a world where people can list their apartment on Airbnb so long as they don't make a profit.
And on PayPal, you can be a business, and on eBay, you can be a business.
Yep.
It's just that at a certain level, you become a business that's regulated.
Arun, we're on the same wavelength a little bit. I love this idea, Sunil. I'm glad you presented it. You helped lead the charge on some of the early peer-to-peer car sharing legislation, and thank you forever for that. From the practical standpoint, at least in peer-to-peer car sharing, is, we're already bumping up against this limit. We kind of got a safe harbor for sharing up to your operating costs, which, ends up being about $10,000 a year or something or along those lines. The challenge is there's so much interest in sharing cars, and there's so much opportunity with it that even if it's just an individual, it brings around challenges where do you stop someone from sharing, after 7 months out of the year when, we're predicting you're passing your limit. Obviously, the onus is kind of on the operator of the company to enforce the law. There's that issue, and then basically, I just want to make sure that if, you don't get a short-term gain for long-term pain and limiting of the platform. We've also seen lots of people who share their first car and then sign up to share their second and the third car, and they buy a car as an investment. So somehow there has to be a structure where you can keep going and keep being that catalyst for the sharing economy without, facing fines or jail time or big problems.
So running out of time, I wanted to shift gears just a little bit, make sure we're talking about a couple of things. Neal, I found your talk to be really interesting, thinking about grassroots movements as a way to catalyze the sharing economy. I think a quote from you was replication, not scale, is the way to scale the sharing economy. I love the sentiment of that idea, but I'm curious to hear what the entrepreneurs think about it.
We like replication.
Anybody else? Yeah.
So I'm not an entrepreneur on the stage, but I do think that there is a way in which replication has happened on a larger scale. So I used to live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which, by the way, we were the birthplace of Sunday soup in that, well, Chicago did it first, but the idea actually came from Grand Rapids and then moved to Chicago. But anyhow, so there's this thing that happens every year in Grand Rapids. It's called Art Prize. It's called Art Prize because it is supposedly the largest amount that is given to an artist who wins like the sort of crowdsourced competition. The whole city turns into a gallery, and you have just artists coming from all around the world. People come in to this festival, which lasts about a week and a half, and vote for the final person to get that prize. They have a couple other juries as well, and maybe that whole concept of like awarding art by the crowd, it could or might not be problematic, but I think what's interesting about it is actually it comes from the grassroots in Grand Rapids. So Grand Rapids actually has a really active artist scene, and it has been doing pop-up art shows in abandoned places, abandoned buildings, abandoned houses for at least 20 years ahead of Art Prize. These are events that people go to on a regular basis, and when Art Prize was started, it really did borrow from a lot of those things. The people who started Art Prize actually went to those pop-up art events on a regular basis that were just organized from the grassroots. So if we're talking about replication, I think it's really interesting because there are a lot of things that can be taken from the grassroots. Not everything needs to be reinvented, and it's not just business models that you can replicate, but it's also like fairness models, like protection models for workers, including looking at franchising history, including looking at domestic workers' history, and seeing how those groups have actually already identified a lot of the needs that are in the peer economy. We just haven't recognized that yet.
Yeah, and I mean, just to sort of add to that, I ignored you the first time. Why am I going to pay attention to you now? I'm kidding. Right. Wasting my time. So I think that part of what can facilitate replication is a little help, is a little sort of sort of catalysis from the outside, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So I mean both of us were at another conference last week, and I spent a lot of time talking to the food assembly. Very grassroots. Someone locally sort of sets up a way for people in the community to sort of buy food from their local farmers market. But there's a template, there's sort of there's guidance sort of given in a centralized way that facilitates this grassroots sort of growth. About 5 years ago, I got involved for a while with a project in India to give all of their 1.2 billion citizens ID. It was a huge enrollment effort. It's about halfway done, more than 600 million people. But no way that they could set up a centralized entity to sort of do this. And so again, they sort of created blueprints centrally, created the technology centrally, created the training program centrally. 75,000 entities sort of engaged in a grassroots sort of enrollment effort. And so this combination, I keep saying franchising because it reminds me of that, but it's not commercial. It's just that the intelligence is central and the effort and the activity is local.
All right, well, I think we're out of time, but thanks a lot for all the ideas. Sorry, do you want one more?
Thanks, guys. I feel like I have another board for my nonprofit. Appreciate it. No, but seriously, just real quick, the really good ideas and thoughts, and some of these we are implementing with the Sharing Cities Network. And we did a share event in 2011, and Shelby, you were there, you keynoted, Jessica, you were there. Jay Nath, Lisa Gansky. This was May 2011, and yeah, we did a couple of these, and we decided that we're not that great at big events, and decided instead to do a kind of distributed model. And this is an amazing event, and I really enjoyed it. It's 500 people, bringing together the leaders, and what we're doing is it's 35 events. Well, actually, it's like 70 events with Oakland because they're doing so many, and it could be up to, I don't know, 5 or maybe even 10,000 people that we're reaching, and so that shows you. And the events are tailored. I mean, they're creating a Share Fest in their own vision that's aligned with their local culture. So it has their own, kind of cool flavor, so that shows you a little bit the power of replication.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot for all the big ideas today. So, very curious to see what happens. Maybe we can do the same thing again next year. But thanks a lot.
Thank you.